we've got Anisha Bakai, Milan Shah, Bella Shah, and Pranay Shah. Anisha is a second-year undergraduate student at Jesus College in Cambridge, reading Spanish and Portuguese. Anisha has worked as a private 11 plus, 13 plus, and 16 plus admissions tutor for the past 4 years with considerable success. She studied at the Henrietta Barnett School and then at Westminster School. She took history, Spanish, English, and biology at A levels and decided to take a gap year before applying to both UK and US universities. She will be studying at the University of Coimbra, I hope I got the thing right, in Portugal next year on an Erasmus placement. Milan Shah was the chair of the Board of Governors at the University of Northampton from 2011 to 2014, where he is now an honorary fellow. This was a transformative period for the pioneering institution, which last year moved to an innovative new campus. He remains engaged in matters of higher education, policy, and broad experience of non-profit governance. And he's also been awarded the MBE. Bella Shah has just completed her third year of a pharmacy master's degree at Cardiff University. During this time, she has also been the social secretary for the Cardiff's Pharmacy Society, as well as the competitions coordinator on the executive committee of the British Pharmaceutical Students Association. Last summer, she embarked on an Erasmus Plus program through which she undertook a 2-month research traineeship at the Charles University in the Czech Republic. Pranay Shah graduated from the University of Oxford last year, having completed an integrated master's degree in biochemistry. Before this, he did A levels in biology, chemistry, maths, and physics. Currently, he is undertaking a biological sciences PhD at the University of Cambridge, researching DNA damage repair and germ cells. So, right, let me kick off with the first question to Milan, please. Milan, I think question was about interest rates on student loans. Obviously, somebody's question is, they've heard that the interest rate is very high for student loans. Perhaps he can just expand on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think if I can give a bit of background, I mean, essentially going to university is one of the biggest choices you're going to make in your life. Just like if you're getting married, buying a house, you've got to think about these things. And a bit like buying a house or buying a car, you've got two aspects. You've got the decision you're making about what you're purchasing or investing in this case, university education. And then you've got the separate issue of how you finance it. And in this case, the government gives this package. And the package has changed over the years. So when I went to university, it was free. The government paid money directly to the university. We've had student loans for some time, and they've escalated from 1,000 to 3,000 to over £9,000. Now, what Savan has done is a really superb job in explaining what is an intensely complex system. And whenever you have complexity, you have the risk that consumers make uninformed decisions. So this issue of interest rates is a very useful one. So the answer is yes and no. It is very expensive, but it's not. And the reason for that is, firstly, in 2012, the system changed. And in fact, I was chairing university at the time, so I remember witnessing this firsthand. Chancellor at the time, Osborne, had a look at the public finances and realized that student debt was going to be massive on the national balance sheet. So essentially, he said, we've got to start re-engineering the numbers so that on behalf of taxpayers, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, we rebalance as to how much the student pays, or the graduate, because you're paying after you finish, and how much the taxpayer pays. So what was a system based on the interest rate being RPI, i.e. just matching in real terms the cost of funds, became an RPI plus system. And the RPI plus system is now it works as follows. Whilst you're at university, you start accruing interest at around, I think, around 3% over inflation. So it's very high while you're at university, but you finish, and on the April after you graduate, it then depends on what you're earning. If you're earning under 25,725, I think was the most recent threshold I saw, Then it goes back to accruing at RPI, which is what I would call the pre-2012 system, and on Savon's slides, it was the Plan 1 system. If you're earning over £46,305, then you end up paying RPI plus 3%. And RPI plus 3%, if you're paying that on a debt for a year, it's one thing. But if you're paying that on a debt that's compounded over a long period of time, over decades in this case potentially, then that can accumulate very rapidly. And I think that's why it's a very valid question to ask. And it is the case that it's a very high rate of interest. However, sorry, I should say that in between the 25,725 and the 46,305, there's a scaled threshold where it goes up from RPI to the RPI plus 3. However, the key point to take into account in this complex student loan system and in this way of financing students in this country is that what you owe is not what you pay. And this is absolutely critical that people take this home, because what you owe is how much you borrowed, and how much you borrowed not just for your tuition, but also for your maintenance, because that all gets rolled into the student loan. And then that is the principle upon which interest is applied. And as I said, interest is applied as a function of what you're earning as a graduate. Then that cumulative sum, and as I said, that can accumulate very rapidly, that cumulative sum is what you owe. What you pay is something totally and utterly different. What you pay is simple, and Savon explained it beautifully. It is 9% over a certain threshold. Now, I think the threshold is £26,575, but it's the sort of thing you can Google. Essentially, if, for example, if you're a nurse coming out on, you've graduated as a nurse, you go into the nursing profession in the NHS, you're on £22,400 approximately. You will pay zero in that first year that you leave university. You'll pay zero for your education. If you're an artist, and you go through your entire career as an impoverished sculptor or artist, and you're only posthumously famous, after which time you're worth a fortune, fine. You've gone through your entire career without actually paying anything for your student education. And in actual fact, the models that the Treasury runs, and the National Audit Office as well has scrutinized this quite heavily, the models that they run show that really only a sixth, in fact, just over a sixth, about 17% of the people leaving university will pay back in full both the principal and the interest. The vast majority will pay some proportion of the principal and some proportion of the interest, and there's actually a significant minority that will not pay anything. And that's because at the end of 30 years, it's scrubbed in any case. So, someone used the phrase massive debt. You'll have a massive debt when you leave. I would potentially rephrase that. I think the entire system is geared to scare you off going to university. The entire system is, in terms of the financing, the communication of it is extremely poor. It's designed to make you feel as if you're going to come out with a massive debt. No. On paper, you'll have a massive debt, but what you actually have to repay is something totally and utterly different. It's more akin to a graduate tax. It's even paid through the income tax system. It's employers who add an extra 9% on. So what I would say is, just as going to university is a difficult decision in terms of the choices you make, whether to go, where to go, what courses to study, etc., and webinars like this are absolutely invaluable in adding to all the information, advice, and guidance that's out there, which can be quite poor. A lot depends on what school you went to, a lot depends on who your friends are, and a lot depends on whether anybody in your family ever went to university. Now, obviously, as an immigrant community moves on, there'll be more and more people you can turn to. But webinars like this are invaluable. But when it comes to student finance, which is its own complex, the devil is in the detail, truly, in the student finance, I would say you should all do your research as to whether you want to take that finance on or not. What I would suggest is, one of the best explanations that I've come across is from Martin Lewis, money saving expert. And if you want, I can certainly share after this webinar through your Twitter or Facebook feeds the links to his quite excellent explanation of that.
We can put the links onto our Facebook page, if need be, on the CAT8 Facebook page. So maybe we can do that. Everybody can benefit from that, Milan. Thank you. Nirmal?
Yeah, thank you, Ramit. Guys, Sawan and Drishti and also Milan, good insights into a university and what choices people have. I'm going to ask a question from the other side now. Sawan, in your slides, you mentioned that Scottish universities actually do not have any fees for Scottish home students and EU nationals who go to Scottish universities. How are Scottish universities funded? So there's actually two questions here. The second one is, we're going to have a drop in international students, potentially because of COVID and various other reasons. If that happens, how is that going to impact university finances in the coming cycle? And what are universities going to do to mitigate against that cycle?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. A large majority of the finances that come to universities are, believe it or not, donations. So basically, what it is that rather, they don't just rely on fees in terms of from the student tuition fee loans and things like that. A larger part of the finance is actually from donations. So from people who graduate, the alumni essentially, they always ask them for how they can actually help and support the university. Other people, for example, who graduated in a university and say who pass away, and through their wills and things like that, they may have left a substantial fund for the university in question. That's where the majority of funds for universities may actually come from. So they're not just solely dependent on, say, for example, the student finances, for example, right, in terms of the tuition fees and so on. So the Scottish universities actually don't rely on, obviously, in any shape and format on the home fees from their Scottish nationals or the EU nationals, but they actually try and attract as many international students as well as possible, because obviously the international students will pay. So many universities will actually get a lot of fees from the international students, who will actually be bringing in a lot of money to the universities. So obviously universities do like as many international students as possible. In the case of Scotland itself, Scotland have a very well developed social welfare system. So it's not just at university where everything is free. It's literally throughout from young age, literally all school years, literally everything is free. So essentially, they've got they do collect obviously a bigger proportion of taxes than UK does, and again through the taxation system, they will be actually collecting and spending more on the universities. So that answers that question. The other question was, I think, regarding basically in regards to the COVID-19 situation. Yeah, a lot of things are obviously going to be different. I think the universities are going to be competing more with each other in the sense of trying to recruit as many, for example, international students, since they will be limited. They will also have to kind of think about how, in the most cost-effective way, they can deliver the same lectures, the same, for example, if it's a clinical kind of educational scenario, how they can deliver that in the most cost-effective way possible. And it could also be the case that some universities might also be merging the education sessions together. There are lots of possibilities. We just have to wait and see. But the main thing is that a lot of things will be different. That's for sure.
Shandip?
Thanks. Sorry, Ramit, can I just ask if anyone else has anything to add to that?
Sorry, Nirmal, just very quickly on Scotland, it's a policy matter for the Scottish government. They've chosen to directly fund the education of Scottish students. So that's a decision they made. The funding in England, so we used to have what's called the HEFCE, the Higher Education Funding Council for England. Traditionally, it gave the money to the universities to educate the undergraduates, but bit by bit, that X billion of funding a year, sometimes up to 8-9 billion, gradually shifted to the student loans company, and the student loans company is now the route by which the funding flows to universities. But in Scotland, they said let's just keep it let's just keep the education free directly. What was the other question that you had regarding?
So, the one question, so the second part of the question was international students, and I think what Sawan was talking about in the answer was more along the lines of competing for the international students that are there.
True.
Looking at the scenario right now, and you look at air bridges being opened in places to get people in, but people who are actually paying the money, like the Indians, the Chinese,
No, look, totally. No,
yeah.
what I would say is that basically, having spent many years looking at profit and losses for university accounts, at the end of the day, you've got the income that comes from the students, but that's only ever a proportion of your income. For some universities, if you look at Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, research income will be a heavy proportion of what they're bringing in. If I just look at the medical triangle. At Northampton, we ran a bus company, that covered the county. It covered our students, but it covered everything else and brought in a fair bit of extra income. And all of these things helped us give bursaries to students and do other things. So what I'm saying is there's many, many different strands of income in terms of where they come in from. Now, it's very well known that international students are critically important, both in terms of the diversity they bring in, because obviously one part of going to university is taking somebody from a particularly localized setting in terms of schooling, how they've grown up to date, and putting them into an atmosphere where they're exposed to different values, they're challenged in their beliefs, etc., etc. And if you can make that not just challenged by other people from around the country, but other people from around the world, that's what's making a rounded university education. But in addition to that, obviously it brought in a lot of money. So all universities have been looking very carefully at their international strategies to think, what are we going to do this year? Now, since Theresa May tightened up controls and Indian students essentially reduced in terms of numbers coming over, there's been a repair job done with respect specifically to India. But if you look at overall internationally, Britain has been slipping a bit, definitely. But to a large extent, there's still large numbers of international students that come across. In COVID year, it's going to be different. And each institution is examining and interrogating its own practices as to think, how can we do it? So I picked up the phone to the institution that I used to chair and said, what are you guys doing? And they said, look, we're keeping very closely in touch with each country. We're looking at what's the opportunities for students to come across. And at the stage at which they thought that they were going to go in quarantine, they had actually organized halls and residences at no cost to the students for them to spend 14 days in quarantine and stuff. So each university will look at its resources and think, what can we do for our students?
Okay, can we, sorry, Nirmal, we need to move on. We've only got about 10, 15 minutes left. We need to take us some more questions. Sandeep, can you?
Yeah, so basically there's a couple of questions here on maintenance loans, and really Savan or any of the students actually can take this. So one of the questions is it worth taking the maximum sum available, since you mentioned earlier that you may not end up paying it all back? And also regarding loan repayments, do students pay only the tuition fees, or does it include maintenance loans as well? So
Everything.
Savan, do you want to start it off? And
yeah, I'll just be short on this one.
Yeah.
So I'll say yes. You take as much as you can get. Grab it with both hands. And basically, the other thing I would say is that on the second part of the question is that basically, yes, you have to pay back both the tuition fee loan and the maintenance loan. It's a cumulative total, basically. Yeah?
Excellent. Excellent. Well answered and very quick. So yeah, next person, Rumit.
Yeah, Jatin, please. Jatin?
Sorry, just getting.
There you go.
Quick one for Savan. Apprenticeships. How does one apply for these, and how do you go about searching for these?
Sure. Yeah. So the apprenticeships are basically very different. So there is, it's not the same format as like going through to like university, for example. So what it is that you have to look for apprenticeships. Basically, there is a kind of a national database for apprenticeships, but also more importantly, you can actually look at individual organizations that actually run apprenticeship programs and apply to them directly. And that way, basically, it's probably the more preferable route essentially, because it's directly to the employer as such.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can I ask Anisha, please, to answer this one? Maybe and the other students who are in university currently may be able to help as well. How will the start of university this year be different to other years? Obviously, bearing in mind the COVID-19 pandemic we've had.
So the start is going to be really different. At the moment, we're getting sort of emails every day, every couple day, with new decisions being made as in line with sort of government guidelines. So I think the key thing is to be in constant communication, open every email in your inbox to see how things are changing. It's going to be very different in that, for example, I know at Cambridge what they're looking at doing is creating bubbles depending on which houses and staircases that students live in, and they won't be allowed to interact with people outside of those bubbles necessarily. There are also going to be things like staggered lunch times to avoid crowded cafeterias. Lectures are obviously going to be online, but smaller sort of supervision groups may still take place in person, so long as that 2-meter distance can be maintained. Freshers Week is obviously going to be very different and mostly online. And I would assume that it's going to take a sort of format of networking as opposed to sort of parties or maybe sort of like online parties. But essentially, they're going to try as hard as possible to mimic what would have happened had this not been the circumstances. But yeah, I think the key message is to not miss any important emails and to stay up to date with the information the university is releasing.
Good. Bella or Pranay?
No, I think I agree with that. If anything we've learned from the last few months is things can change day by day instantly.
Yeah.
So what the unis might tell you now might be completely different then. But I think, yeah, it seems like that'll be their plan forward, sort of doing bubbles and things like that, trying to minimize contact. Yeah.
Okay. Nirmal?
Open University. So this is actually a question related to Open University. Is a Open University degree considered in the same respect as a normal university?
Who to?
I'm sorry, it's an open question. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, it is. It's the Open University is a university like any other. Martha Lane Fox is the chair there. She's speaking on Wednesday. There's something called the Festival of Higher Education, and if anybody wants to dig into this area a bit further, including a session on transition from school to university, it's there. But Martha, who chairs the Open University, is speaking there, and I think that'll be quite interesting. Open University was way ahead of its time, as we're seeing in the COVID crisis.
Exactly. Shandip?
Okay, specific question actually for Anisha. Can you elaborate on the Erasmus opportunity and how it works and who is eligible for this?
Okay, so obviously I'm doing the Erasmus placement through my degree because my 3rd year has to be a year abroad from my 4-year course. So Erasmus is open to, I think this is something that is often overlooked, it's open to students who don't study modern languages, and that is very much the case. There are engineering students at Cambridge from specific colleges that have taken Erasmus places in Germany, for example. So the thing is, it's a very much sort of, it's something that happens on a very much individual basis on colleges and universities. So that's that part of the question. But Erasmus is essentially an opportunity to receive a government grant, or from the EU, you receive a grant to study abroad. Almost always you don't have to pay any kind of fee because that will be sort of your university, your home institution will pay any kind of fee normally that you would have incurred studying abroad. And it's essentially an opportunity for you to just experience what it's like to study in a different country, and obviously to improve your language skills, your understanding of different cultures. So yeah, that's sort of, and obviously it can be a much shorter placement or a much longer one. I think, was it Bella, in your introduction, you said that you took an Erasmus placement. Mine's going to be a year long, but you can do much shorter ones as well.
Bella, do you want to just give an experience, your experience of Erasmus?
Yeah, so as it was said in my introduction, so I went to Czech Republic, to Charles University, which is one of the oldest and top universities in the world. And I did a research project which was based around placenta. So I was looking at how enzymes develop and are affected in placenta, and this led to results which were later published. There was other opportunities within pharmacy, so you could go clinically, research like I did, hospital, community. There were different lengths as well. My course is one of the ones where you can't do the year out, so it had to be a summer placement or a winter one. And during my time when I wasn't in the labs, I took it to travel. So I went to 4 neighboring countries while I was there. So even that was just amazing to be able to travel. And obviously made a lot of friends, and contacts as well. And it's going to be really useful in the future because it's somewhere I can go back to or even do a PhD, if I wish to. So I'd really recommend even applying if you're just considering.
Sorry, I just like to. I always did one, and the ways to find them are usually career services. But I think as people start uni, be careful with Brexit and things because the Erasmus programs might change, and the way they're offered, the way they're funded, the way the UK is involved in them, I think will be heavily different to what the three of us might have experienced.
Good point, Pranay. Yeah,
totally agreed. Yeah.
Chetan?
This is a question to Savan, to do with university open days. Now, obviously, the traditional method was you go and visit each of the universities and see what's going on, familiarize yourself with the universities. That's going to be non-existent with COVID-19 for the present moment. And the virtual tools they may provide may not be up the same experience that you would get with going physically to see the universities. What else can one do to find out more information about the universities and specifically the courses that they intend to do?
Yes, I think the most important thing there is just to try and gather as much information as possible from speaking to, for example, recent graduates, current students at those universities. When obviously eventually things will open up and you can actually go down for a physical viewing, then by all means do so. But at the moment, it's going to be from a multitude of sources. So that means your online, basically, open days, together with whenever the physical open days open, then speak to as many people as you can. Mainly, obviously, current students, look at student satisfaction surveys, and also speak to recent graduates. So all of that together will give you a good idea of whether a university really stands up. But looking at the league tables alone is not going to be very helpful.
Just to add to that, I think the university is obviously a big deal because that's why you're going, but the town makes a big difference as well. So even if you can't visit the university necessarily, if you can maybe just visit the town and nearby the university, go and do that at least.
Also, I think something that is very individual to each student is looking at the difference between campus universities, ones that are in a city. For example, you'll have a completely different experience at a London university like UCL and LSE than you would at somewhere like Warwick or Cambridge. And you really have to think about what kind of person you are, whether you prefer to be in smaller communities. Obviously, there's the collegiate system at Cambridge and Oxford, or if you'd rather be in a city setting like London, where you will be a lot more spread out and it'll be much harder to see fellow students because you'll be living in accommodation that's far away from each other. But equally, you'll then have access to what London has to offer as opposed to a smaller city.
Okay, so from the answers you guys are given, it seems that it's not just the academic side of things that you use when you go to see open universities, so the open days, but it's also getting a feel for the university and the city that the university is in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have literally run out of time today. We've got a lot more questions. So what we will end up doing now is we will print off all our questions. We will do an addendum with all of the panel and add it onto the video, which will go onto our YouTube page. So before I finish, I'd firstly like to thank both Savan and Drishti for a wonderful presentation. and for Savan, Drishti, Pranay, Bella, and Milan, and Anisha for a great question and answer session. I'm very sorry that we are running out of time today. But obviously there's lots of questions which we will definitely try and answer later on. I hope everybody has found this webinar helpful. As I said, we've recorded this. It will go on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. One thing about the YouTube channel, please, if I may urge everybody to go onto the YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's free and just need to put in your email address, because going forward, even though we'll be doing some webinars, we're also getting on the point of actually doing some soundbite things, which will be about 10-20 minutes long, and we will be putting them onto our YouTube pages and the Facebook page. So please look out for this. If there's anybody elderly, vulnerable, and those in isolation and key workers still needing any help, we're still providing this, and our numbers on the poster there. And if you have any other questions from today's webinar or our earlier webinars, please call, SMS, or WhatsApp our helpline. And this is the helpline number. Like I say, for the minute, we are going to go through some new topic ideas for webinars, and we will come back to you all. You'll see it either on the web, on the pages here, on our social media pages, or we will be also sending out emails to those who've registered with us. So thank you again very much for attending today. Be safe, stay alert, control the virus, save lives, and go and clap for the carers today. It's in 10 minutes time. So goodbye. Thank you.